Skeletal muscles come in different shapes and sizes, but the main structure of a skeletal muscle cell is basically the same. If we were to take a cross-section of a single muscle, we would find it is covered in a protective sheath or layer called the epimysium. The epimysium protects the muscle from friction against other muscles and bones. It also continues at the end of the muscle to form, along with other connective tissues, the tendon which attaches the muscle to the bone. Each muscle is made up of a number of bundles of muscle fibers called fasciculi. The fasciculi are contained within another connective tissue called the perimysium. Each bundle of muscle fibers contains anywhere from 10 and 100 individual fibers. A large, strong muscle, such as those in the quadriceps group, would have a large number of fibers within each bundle. A smaller muscle used for precision movement, such as those in the hand, would contain far fewer muscle fibers in each bundle. Each muscle fiber is also covered in a fibrous connective layer of tissues called the endomysium, which insulates each fiber. Beneath the endomysium is the sarcolemma, which is the muscle fiber's cell membrane, and beneath this is the sarcoplasm. This is a gelatinous fluid which contains glycogen and fats for energy, as well as mitochondria, inside which the cell's energy is produced. Each muscle fiber itself contains cylindrical organelles known as myofibrils. Each muscle fiber contains hundreds or thousands of myofibrils, which themselves are bundles of proteins called actin and myosin. These run the length of the muscle fiber and are important in muscle contraction. Surrounding the myofibril, there is a network of tubules and channels called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, where calcium is stored, which is also important for muscle contraction. Each myofibril can be broken down into functional repeating segments called sarcomeres, which are the basis for muscle contraction theory known as sliding filament theory. For more on physical education and sports coaching,
pairs of muscles that perform opposing actions, like flexing and extending or bending and straightening. Muscles involved in these paired actions are categorized as agonists and antagonists. A muscle that contracts to generate the main force of an action is called the prime mover, or the agonist for that action. Muscles that perform the paired and opposing action are called the antagonists. The agonists in elbow flexion are the muscles that contract to bring the elbow joint into a flexed position. The antagonists are the muscles that perform the opposite action, elbow extension. When the action of elbow extension occurs, the roles switch. The triceps brachii is now the agonist and contracts to extend the limb, while the biceps brachii muscle is relaxed and becomes the antagonist. Muscle interactions throughout body regions involve paired actions. These include flexion and extension, elevation and depression, and pronation and supination.
Our hand is made of forearm and upper arm bones. Both of these bones are joined at elbow. Upper arm bones are covered with biceps muscles and triceps muscles. Forearm bone is connected to upper arm muscles by a tissues called tendons. When we want to lift something with our arm, our brain sends the signal to biceps muscle to contract and triceps muscle to relax. When biceps contracts, its length decreases and bone attached to it get pulled. In this process, relaxation of triceps muscle provide extra length so that bone can easily move. Muscles apply pull force on bones by contraction, which results in movement.
The normal heart has two sides, a right side and a left side, and four chambers, the top receiving chambers, or atrium, and the lower chambers, which are thick-walled pumping chambers, called ventricles. Red blood cell will come from either the superior vena cava or the inferior vena cava and enter into the right atrium. The blood then flows across the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. The right ventricle then squeezes and ejects that blood cell into a vessel called the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery splits into two vessels, each going to the lungs. As that red blood cell makes its way through the lung, it returns through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. That blood is now oxygenated. It's picked up oxygen, then goes across the mitral valve into the left ventricle, which does most of the work in terms of delivery of blood flow to the body. That blood cell is now ejected into the aorta to some organ or muscle or skin in the human body.
The autonomic nervous system controls contractions of the alimentary canal that move swallowed food down the esophagus, churn the stomach, and move chyme through the small intestine and large intestine. The alimentary canal is a single, continuous tube that includes the oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, and intestines. The tissue layers that form the walls of the tube include two layers of smooth muscle. The contraction and relaxation of these muscles is called peristalsis. One peristaltic wave can be enough to move a bolus down the esophagus and into the stomach. In the intestines, the waves are smaller and more regular. As one section of the intestine contracts, the section in front relaxes. This occurs in the rhythmic, wave-like patterns that create the peristalsis that propels substances forward.
Intercostal muscles contract, pulling the rib cage upward while the diaphragm moves downward, drawing air into the lungs. A restricted airway reduces pressure in the chest cavity, creating an inward movement between the ribs called intercostal retraction, particularly visible in children. In cases of severe respiratory distress, the sternum will visibly retract as well. Peristaltic wave can be enough to move a bolus down the esophagus and into the stomach. In the intestines, the waves are smaller and more regular. As one section of the intestine contracts, the section in front relaxes. This occurs in the rhythmic, wave-like patterns that create the peristalsis that propels substances forward. Intercostal muscles contract, pulling the rib cage upward while the diaphragm moves downward, drawing air into the lungs. A restricted airway reduces pressure in the chest cavity, creating an inward movement between the ribs called intercostal retraction, particularly visible in children. In cases of severe respiratory distress, the sternum will visibly retract as well.